This was no time to eat.
I think somebody said there were about 5,000 people there.
We had nothing, and we were getting hungry.
Food doesn't just appear on the table by itself. Somebody has to prepare it.
His words filled me like no feast ever had.
No one invited me to their table, and no one accepted invitations to sit at mine.
A perfectly good meal ruined by her.
Why here? Why now? The tension in the city is so thick it makes the hair on my head stand up. Yes, it is Passover. Yes, there are traditions to be observed. But why in Jerusalem? The leaders are watching extra closely. The Romans are beefing up their ranks. He has been talking about death more and more, and to top it all off, there was all that attention when he entered the city. Is this really the best place to eat the Seder meal? Why aren't we back in Galilee, in sleepy Capernaum? Must he confront the enemy so blatantly? We've been eating meals all through the country. Why must this one be in Jerusalem? Why must this one be now? This is no time, no place to eat.
There were people everywhere. They were spread all over the hillside as far as the eye could see. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands of them. I think somebody said there were about 5,000 people there.
My husband said there must have been 5,000, and he was only counting the other men. He won't count the women. No one does. But the teacher did. The teacher told us, even us, to stay, to come close, to listen to his words.
We'd been there all day just listening,
Learning,
resting.
laughing,
We were even singing.
rejoicing.
And then I was hungry.
My children were hungry. I was hungry. My husband was ready to force us to make the long walk home on empty stomachs. I said, no. How am I supposed to feed you and them here? He said.
I'd almost forgotten that my mother had packed a lunch for me before I'd left the house because it was such a long day. And it was kind of supper hour, so I decided I'm hungry, and I pulled out the bread and the fish, all of the stuff that my mother had packed for me, and I thought others were going to do the same. But so many of them were kind of just looking at me, and I had something to eat. But they didn't.
We looked to the teacher with hungry eyes. His disciples saw the look in our eyes and ran to him to find out what they should do. Perhaps they thought there would be a fight over what little food was to be found among so many.
I couldn't just eat while the others were looking at me, and they were going to go hungry too. We'd all had a long day, and Jesus had been talking the whole day about love and compassion, about mercy and peace. I was confused. After hearing all of that, what could I do with the little that I had? I must have had a big question mark on my face because I was looking around, and then I saw Jesus, and he was looking at me. He must have seen that question mark. And then there was a voice that told me, just go to him. So I went and I took the little bag with the fish and the bread in it that my mother had packed for me, just for me, and I handed it to him and I said, maybe this will help. And he said, thank you. Can you believe that? Jesus said, thank you to me. I'm just a child.
What a silly child. Yes, it was a nice gesture, but what is that going to do for us? For so many. Perhaps the child and Jesus would sit and eat, and the rest of us would just watch and grow more and more hungry?
It was a miracle.
A miracle.
And then everybody ate from the little that I brought.
Everyone was satisfied. There were even leftovers. There was nothing to worry about. Jesus provided.
What is he saying? The bread is his body. The wine is his blood? I don't understand. Remember him? I thought we were remembering the deliverance from slavery, the exodus from Egypt. Is this something new? And if that isn't enough to confuse us, he washed our feet. He's the host of this meal, not a lowly servant. He's our reverend teacher. He works miracles with those hands. Now he's putting them on our filthy feet and making them clean.
It was a perfect meal, for him at least. Okay, I don't agree with everything he teaches. Yeah, some of my fellow Pharisees are outraged by some of the things he says and he does. He does seem to have contempt for the law. But I find him fascinating, and so I just wanted to have a nice dinner so that I could have him in my home, away from the crowds, maybe get to ask him some questions that have been on my mind. Perhaps we would even find more common ground that we could both share. He was in my home. My home! Everything was going really well. And then she came in. Oh, I don't know her name. It's not important. She's not important. But I do know what she does. I've seen her working the street. I've seen her occupying the shadows, hoping that decent people don't see her. And there she comes, into my home, interrupting dinner, grabbing the teacher's attention. She wasn't invited to sit at my table. She never would be, anytime, but especially when he was at it. But there she comes, sits on the floor next to his couch, and begins to bathe his feet with perfume, and dry his feet with her hair. What a spectacle she was making of herself. He should have kicked her away and demanded that she leave. But he just let her go on doing what she was doing. He even had the audacity to tell me I was not being a good host because I wasn't treating her well. Well, I thought he was one of those humble spiritual types who did not want all the fanfare. Besides, given his station and mine, I owed him nothing. And yet it was not this criticism that was the most outrageous thing he had to say at the table. After telling me what I did not do for him, Jesus looks at that woman who's so inappropriately at that table, so inappropriate everywhere she goes, and he tells her that in spite of all that she had done, her sins are forgiven. Does he know how deep her sinfulness is? I can't wash her head or his feet, but those things are beyond the pale, and yet he says to her, your sins are forgiven. Such a perfect meal I prepared for him, and it was ruined by her. Well, ruined by him letting her stay.
Lord, you are not going to wash my feet, I said in protest. But he confused me more when he said, you do not know what I'm doing, but later you will understand. Later? When later? In a few hours? Tomorrow morning? When? You will never wash my feet, I shouted, jumping up. Typical of him, he stayed calm, saying, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. Well then, I said, not only my feet, Lord, but also my hands and my head. I thought perhaps maybe he would be impressed by my zeal. But unimpressed, he said, one who has bathed does not need to wash, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you. He had said that one at the table was going to betray him. That's what he must have meant by not all of you. And yet, he let the betrayer sit at the table.
I was the loneliest man in town. Oh, people knew me, knew my name, but it was never said politely, only with contempt. There goes Zacchaeus, I would hear them say, the cheat, the traitor, the tax collector. They might as well have called me a dog. I'm sure some of them did. I'm sure others thought it too nice a name to put on me. And so you can certainly be assured that I certainly did not get invited to anyone's home, and no one accepted an invitation to mine. Perhaps mealtime was the most lonely time of all. There were not a few times that I almost invited my servants to sit down with me just so that I would have the company. But that would not have been appropriate, nor proper. But everything changed that day Jesus came to town. He had a reputation for eating with anyone. Anyone. Sinners of great note, and tax collectors like me. I even heard one of his followers had been a tax collector. Well, short as I am, and with folks not allowing me to get to the front of the crowd. In fact, the crowd would have turned on me if I had gotten too close, so I climbed a tree so that I could see this radical host. And see him I did. And no one was more shocked than me when he stopped near the tree I was in and called up to me. Why did he do that, I thought. I was trying to stay unnoticed, but called up to me and called attention to me, and he said that I better come down because he was on his way to my house. He was about to join me at my table. The rest of the crowd was stunned into silence so that no one said anything to me or about me as I came down and started to walk with Jesus to my house. Oh, I set the finest table for him. Brought out the best foods that I had in the house. Didn't have a lot of time to prepare. In the spirit of the day, I had invited my servants to sit down and enjoyed the company of this Jesus who was so graced my table that day. Actually, it didn't feel like my table anymore. It really was his table that day, and I was sitting at it.
Beyond the bread and the wine and the washing of the feet, he said so many things that night. We all were filled to overflowing. His words were so comforting that we almost forgot all the trouble that was stirring in the city.
Obviously, Mary had forgotten about the work that goes into having a guest at our table.
Even though Jesus had visited us before, there was still so much he had to say I had never heard before, that I had never thought about. It was so amazing to just sit there at his feet and listen to him talk.
So much to do to get the meal on the table, and she was just sitting there at his feet.
Listening.
Listening? How about doing a little work?
I could hear Martha banging about in the kitchen. How I wished she would just stop for a second and listen to what he was saying.
I thought maybe my banging about would help draw attention to the important work that needed to be done. She could have taken a few minutes to let Jesus rest and come give me a hand. She was not moving. Finally, I could let it go no longer. I went out there and I said to Jesus, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me."
But Jesus said back to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, and there is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part of which will not be taken away from her."
I was holding a dish towel and I was about to ball it up and throw it at him for not taking my side. But
Wisely.
I stopped myself and I let what he said sink in.
I was glad to see Martha take a deep breath and sit down next to me.
But I did finally come to understand that the better part was being served there at his feet, in the words that he spoke.
And all was.
At peace. Even though some of what he said was hard to hear, we were at peace. As we listened, as we ate, as we laughed, and as we cried. Yes, Lord, I remember it all. That night and the days that followed, those years of walking with you. With all the tables, all the meals, all the guests, and all the hosts. I will remember it every time we eat the bread and drink the cup. In your name, Jesus. In your name.